Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest. Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted that Mohamed Samir has joined me in the studio today. Welcome, Mohamed.
Thank you very much.
Looking forward to hearing your story today. We always start by getting to know our guests, so please tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
I'm a FMCG veteran, so I spent my career since '89 working mostly for 30 years with Procter & Gamble. Then I had a couple of stints with a regional company. Then I did a bit of consultancy for a couple of years to discover that it's not my cup of tea. So for the past 8 months, I've been CEO of Halwani company, which is a food company out of Saudi. And this is where I'm speaking to you from today in Jeddah. And on a personal level, I have 3 boys and happily married.
Super. And we'll come to some of the personal stuff again later. Thank you for that introduction. Our podcast always starts where it should start, which is what shaped us when we were younger. So again, tell us a bit about what it was like for you growing up and how that impacted you early on in life.
I grew up in many places around the world, and I think that impacted me in a big way. I started traveling with my family since I was 40 days old. So spent a few years in Libya, then the US, then a bit in Saudi, and for sure did my university degree out of Egypt. But I think traveling around has been a very important part of my life. I think the second part has, although my late father has been an engineer, his advice to me from the very beginning was, don't become an engineer. And like many kids, I wanted to be an engineer like my father. And he told me, listen, if you're going to be successful in your life, you're going to be a manager one day. So why don't you go and learn management? So that's what I ended up doing. At the beginning, I told him, no, I still want to be an engineer. So I think these two parts, the advice from my father and traveling around the world, were big parts of who I am today.
And can you remember, in terms of that environment you were growing up in, amongst the advice, what kind of traits were coming out from you naturally early on as that kind of teenager that you can remember?
What I remember well is that I learned from traveling is that although there are many, many similarities between the people from different parts of the world, there are still small differences that if you're not careful about, you will not get the best from your relationship with the different people. And I think recognizing that early on was important. And also then doing assignments around the world taught me this in a bigger way. That the way you say things and the way people react to them is very different. Sometimes by individual, but in many times also just because of the nature of the people from the specific country you're dealing with. Like in the UK, for example, when someone tells you it's not too bad, it means it's amazing, right? And, maybe in the US, someone will say it's awesome when actually it's just okay. Right. So learning this and learning how to cope with this I think is very important part of being a leader.
And we can't always remember this, but can you remember the earliest time that you had any dream whatsoever in terms of what you wanted to do in your life, obviously amongst the advice from your father, but can you remember that time?
Yeah, I remember actually. So I think it formed well in my head when I was studying in the university. At that time, I was taking marketing courses and I started liking marketing. It was like common sense for me. And in the textbook, there were so many examples of different multinationals. P&G caught my attention. I was in my second year of university, and this is when I said, okay, this is what I'm going for. I knew that I was going for marketing. I knew that I wanted either FMCG or I wanted to go to the hospitality business. I liked the idea of working in a hotel and being in a full suit and dealing with it. But I discovered early on that in the hospitality business at that time, sales and marketing were too close together for my taste. And I wanted real marketing. When I went and did my interviews with different multinationals, ended up with being with P&G, I discovered that this is the type of work that I like. So it happened back in university time, but then it became stronger when I got advice 2 years into working to write my first vision for myself. So back in 91, I wrote myself in a vision. I had very clear objectives of what I want to achieve. And I kept on referring back to it. And I still have it. It's handwritten. And I don't type it. I like to keep it handwritten. So I remember the day I wrote it back in 91.
And what is that, a vision about your holistic life, or is it purely professional?
It's holistic. It had three main components. One about the family, and where it's my main purpose is to make my children better than me. And I have another piece which is around, I like to help others succeed. So I really like to help people, especially puzzle about what they want to do with their life and what type of work they want to do. And especially when they're out of a job and looking for another job. And this is a time when I like to see people succeeding, and I'm extremely happy and proud of people who especially go into a dip and then pick it up again. And then on the professional level, I had very clear targets for myself on what I want to achieve, and with timelines and by what date and everything. And then there was a third component about kind of the principles and what type of financial freedom that I want to have. And I decided early on that this financial freedom or financial independence, if you want to call it, is a very important part of your ability to stick to your principles. And I'm very proud when I look back at it. I say, okay, success is to be able to deliver what I wrote down back in 91. And I'm still going, trying to deliver all of it.
Talk about that first decade in your 20s, about the challenge of living that life that you set out for yourself.
Yeah, I think there were big choices to be made at that time to deliver on this vision and stick to the principles. And I think as I developed into my career and I started attending different trainings and learning, there are a couple of things that stuck with me. The first is, I always tell people, listen, when you have an opportunity to get trained or attend a training or go learn from someone, don't delay it, because business will always be there. But if you waste an opportunity to learn, it's going to be difficult to bring it back. And when you go and try to learn it, your colleagues who are at the same level would have learned it already. And I remember I was taking a course a few years back called the Corporate Athlete. You probably heard about it. And that training, average age of the group was about 42 years old. And the trainer told us, listen, why don't you just write down the key parts of your vision? So after 5 minutes, she said, are you ready? Most of us said yes. Some of us said, no, give me another 5 minutes. So she said, had 42 years to write down your vision, and now you want 5 minutes more? You know, this stuck with me, which is really put an effort to spend some time on the things that will make a difference in where you're going. Because if you don't know where you're going, you will never know whether to say, well done for achieving it, or it just came by luck. So I think this was a very important part. On managing my career, I think on the good side, I'm a very competitive person. So I always wanted to do things, faster than others, better than others. I wanted to get promoted faster than the people around me. But I always had a principle of, I will compete fairly. I will never do anything that takes down the person next to me so I can make it up. And I think that's a very important learning for me over the years, that as the pyramid as you get higher in the pyramid, it's not always a fair game. The politics play a role. What you say can be taken against you. So you start learning to be very careful what you say in front of different people. But the principle of that I will always play fairly did not change. I will never say anything. One of the things I always say is that whenever I take a new assignment, I never question any of the decisions that were made before. Because I say I was never in the context. So you never know the context that they made the decision during. So you find some leaders when they come, they start questioning all the decisions that happened for the 3 or 5 years before them to show how good they are afterwards. I think if you really want to show you're good, then you deliver in the assignment you're in as if you're there for the rest of your life, despite of the circumstances, not because the circumstances are good or are beneficial for the area. Another principle I had is that I never said no to an assignment. So wherever it was, I would take it because I think the experiences are very important. Sometimes people say, for example, I'm okay to go to these countries, but I'm not okay to go to these countries. I say, listen, I don't want to name specific countries, but sometimes people say, I don't want to go to this country. And I say, okay, there are 100 million people living in this country. What makes you better than them? You're even going to go as an expat. So you would be among the top or above average in this country. So you'll have a privilege living there. So that's another thing that I think helped my career, is that I was always available to get it to the next level. And that got me actually a benefit of getting promoted early as a country manager, very early on in my career, because I took an assignment that many people said no to.
Let's look at your 20s there in terms of you fresh from this vision. It's something you're working towards. We know some aspects of that come later in life. But if we look at that decade in your 20s, remembering back, what do you think was the biggest setback for you in relation to you living that vision that you'd painted out for yourself?
I think it has been difficult. The first failure is always difficult. And the only way you can succeed is to pass through a few failures. And the question is, how fast can you get out of it and learn out of it? So, there's a saying about we choose to either win or learn. For sure, for the first big failure in my career, this has not been my motto. So I was very, very disappointed. We were doing kind of a test market for a product and it failed miserably. And I had high hopes that we're going to make it, turn it into a big brand. And I remember my boss's boss's boss came to me and he put his hand on my shoulders and he told me, listen, it's not your fault. We did this test market to learn out of it. When we say we're going to learn out of a test market, doesn't mean that it has to be successful. Right. So, and that was a big learning. So moments like this when, and it has been always that there would be a more senior leader that cares, right? And says something that really makes a difference. There's a story I always remember. I was sitting in a big meeting once and there were like all my bosses, like 4 or 5 bosses on top of me. The biggest one of them asked me for a number. So I said the number. So my boss and my boss's boss both at the same time, they both said, this cannot be right. This is the wrong number. So I looked very bad, right, in the meeting. So the more senior leader who was just below the other boss said, no, I remember this number. Mohamed is correct. So after the meeting, I went and checked and I was completely off. So I went to this boss who saved me in the meeting. And I told him, by the way, I checked the number and I apologized because the number was completely wrong. He told me, Mohamed, I knew the number was wrong, that you are much more important than the number. So moments like this keeps you going, right? That someone cares and will save you will save you in these important times. And for me, this is a big learning. I know some leaders would have on their phone the name of your kids and stuff so that they remember what to tell you. I think it's much more important to be there in these tough moments like this one I just described for you.
Now, going back to your vision, obviously family was going to be important around that eventually, but had that started to shape in your 20s or was that really on the horizon in terms of what your family might look like?
Yeah, that started already in my 20s. And if I go back, I think I'm extremely proud of my family and my children. And I think we always say that I wish I spent more time with them, and the work-life balance. I don't like to call it work-life balance. I like to call it life balance, because if you don't consider your work part of your life, then you don't have a life, because we spend a lot of time at work. But I learned early on the idea of spending quality time and having these good memories. My father passed away when I was 23. And sometimes I think, I wish he spent more time with me. But I still remember what he told me and the times he spent with me until this day. When I look at this and I say, all right, what's important is that every time I spend time with my kids or with my family, I have to be full on with them. I have to be fully attentive. And this made me come up with a principle of people before machines and one machine at a time. So if you have your phone and one of your kids is coming to talk to you, for example, you put your phone down and you give them full attention. If you're driving, don't talk on the phone. So this is the type of thing I learned. And the worst thing you can hear from your children is, we wish you spend more time with us. As long as they don't say that, I think it's okay. And I learned that early on in my career. But what I learned as I became more and more senior is that, companies go on, if you make the company you work in part of your identity, you're in trouble, right? You are who you are because of the experience you're getting in that company, but you are who you are because of who you are and what principles are you living by, and whether you live by your values or, you start twisting them to deliver on your objectives. And I remember sometime when I was pretty senior, I was not happy with how certain things were going where I'm working. And my boss came and told me, Mohammed, if you're that frustrated, why are you sticking around? Why don't you just move on? And this is when I said, okay, if I don't feel happy going to work every morning, then it's time to move on somewhere else, right? Or fix where you are, but don't feel that, okay, I'm going to work, I don't want to spend more time. And I think part of this is, we hear now about working from home. I think part of the issue of working from home is that people, I understand the life balance piece of it, and it's nice to work from home. But there is another part that we need to ask ourselves. Are we working from home because we don't want to go to work? Because we're not enjoying it? Or we're working from home because we want to work from home? And that's why I say, listen, if you're not happy going to work, move on.
Thank you for sharing that. And what I'm interested in now is bearing in mind the vision that you had and the principles that are important to you, and already starting a family. How were your 30s different to your 20s in terms of the challenges you were facing around your leadership and maintaining that vision?
One of my dear bosses told me when I got my first country manager job when I was 29, right? And that time, one of my dear bosses / mentors told me, in your 20s, you're learning. In your 30s, you're giving back. You are already teaching other people. You're already contributing. So the amount of learning you will get is going to be from working with others and from doing things, not necessarily by attending a training, for example. So the frequency of training in my 20s was much more, and the new learnings were much more. But as you get to your 30s, you start learning that you need to give back what you learned in your 30s. And people look up to you in a different way. When you're in 20s, you're just among the young generation available. And your 30s, people who are in their 20s are looking up to you. So you need to act a bit differently and need to give them a figure that they would look up to. And you get much more responsibility. So, being a country manager or a general manager is a big responsibility. And this is the time when you're not only responsible for yourself, but you're responsible also for the people who work with you or report to you, for them and their families. And you get into the tougher decisions of having to let people go. So this all comes in your 30s, maybe.
And talk to us a little bit about the tension that exists between the part of the vision which is driving towards financial freedom and having choices in life not far ahead, and still maintaining the family and the importance of that. There's a really interesting tension there, isn't there, between that? What was that like for you in your 30s?
I would say in my 30s, probably I was, if the years go back, I would have put more time for my family. I think I was very focused on my career that time. I wanted to progress very fast. And so I think my biggest learning is I should have balanced it a bit more. I was not, just to give a small example, I would continue answering emails until late at night. And I learned later that you just need to switch off your work at a certain point of time and focus more on your personal life and your family and so on. If the years go back, I would do that differently. Especially in my 30s. This is the time when, I was very eager to get to the next level.
You talked about the importance of having mentors and sponsors and people looking after you, which is very important in large organizations as well. At what point did you first encounter some kind of coaching, which was maybe external to organization? Is that something you had in your 30s or was that later in life?
I started pretty early coaching, whether it was from my mentors, and I had a few mentors. One of them was my mentor for at least 35 years. And what I loved about his mentoring was that it was very short. So we could spend together 2 minutes. And I would get out of these 2 minutes much more than I would get out from a 1 hour discussion with someone else, because he knew me inside out. And he knew that, and whatever he said to me, I took very seriously because I knew that he knew me very well. And sometimes he gave me very harsh feedback. I appreciated that, and it shaped me really in a big way since my 20s. I started getting external coaching mainly from in my 30s. And in many cases, it was helpful because it's nice always to get people who don't know you well, who are very professional at it, but just see you for what they see at that time, not for what they know about you for the past 10 or 15 years. And so I think the mix of people who know you and people who don't know you is extremely important, as long as you take it seriously. You're not doing it just to tick a box so your company is happy. You're doing it because you really want to learn, become a better person or leader.
Enjoying this journey through the decades, Mohamed. So take us into your 40s. And again, if you can, focus on how you were changing as a leader, and again, just how you were moving towards that vision you set for yourself.
See, in my 40s, there are basically two big learnings for me. And this is when I decided to I started shaping up how I am as a leader. And I decided that for running a business, there are only two things I'm going to focus on. Number one is make decisions for the long term. For sure, deliver the quarter and deliver the month, but always keep an eye on the long term. And the other one was take care of the people so they take care of the business. And I remember my mentor when I was in before I entered my 40s, he told me, listen, if you don't learn to let go and let your people do more of the things you are used to doing, you will not grow because your capacity is going to be limited. So let them do stuff, even if they are going to make mistakes, let them do it. This is the way you're going to grow. And I think this was a very important part of my 40s, and where I learned that when you get it very right with the people, you can achieve much more than what you thought is possible. And I remember that time in my early 40s, I was working for P&G at that time. And at that time, the CEO probably knew my name, knew how I looked like, but he couldn't put them together. What we delivered together as a team at that time made him notice me, made me say, okay, now I know the guy, right? I can count on him because we delivered much more than what we said we're going to deliver. And when I look back, I say, the biggest thing that came at the time is what reputation do you build for yourself? And this is the most important thing. When people say good things about you behind your back, for me, this is the biggest part of success. Because people will say good things about you when you're in a big position. But the test is when you're not around, what are they going to say?
Talk to us a little bit about these principles that you form, the simple principles around the long-term decision making, and also then making sure that the people are looked after so they can look after everything else. Was there ever an opportunity or a time where you felt they might be threatened either due to how the organization was changing culturally or a change in chief executive?
Absolutely. They were, they say that a principle is not a principle until it's tested. And I was tested a few times. And I told my bosses always, listen, we might argue together on big decisions 2 or 3 times a year. And then these big decisions, if they don't go against one of my values or principles, just order me and I will do it. But if something goes against my value system, I'm going to tell you, the order has to be in writing. And a couple of times, my boss wanted me to do something and I told him at the end, you need to put it in writing. He said, no, I won't put it in writing. I told him, then I will not do it because you cannot take it against me if you don't put it in writing. I felt good about it. Oh, it cost me my rating at that year. I was rated lower in my performance, but I felt good because I kept my principles intact. And sometimes in business, even, especially when it comes to pricing, when, let's say, competition price down or promote more and you need to react and it will cost you money, it might cost you the profit of the year. I found that the long-term aspect is very important because you might lose the profitability of the year, but you will keep your business going for a longer time. Because I'm a big believer in building brands, and the brands are not built in a year or 2. Brands are built. Are they like people? You don't build your character in 1 year. It takes time. And as long as you feel that you're sticking to certain principles and so on, you have this feel-good factor about yourself. And you are very critical of yourself as well. So sometimes people say, I just got feedback from the company and I don't like the feedback I'm getting. I disagree with it. I always tell the people, listen, if someone comes and tells you that you're not good in a certain thing and you think you're good at it, it's great news. This means you don't need to do anything. Just keep going. Why are you upset? Like someone tells you, for example, you're not good in communication and you're good in communication. Say, okay, thank you very much. And you move on to do your business. So I think, just in summary, in your 40s, I think this is where is your biggest productive era, and you're tested in a big way because you start getting into bigger positions.
I agree. And what's really interesting, and I don't know your position around this, but it'd be interesting to hear your view. A lot of people that have worked for large corporates and therefore been of service to the companies and get paid great bonuses, don't get me wrong, but that's very different sometimes to having that ability to create the financial freedom in the way that you want to do it for you, as opposed to be in service of, other shareholders and stakeholders in that sense. So was there ever a time where you started to feel that intensely in the sense of when the time was going to be right for you to look at that financial freedom perspective?
Yeah, this is the big dilemma I faced, and I faced it, I think every decade I faced it at least once, which is, will I get my financial freedom by sticking and working with a multinational where I rely on a certain amount of money, including big bonuses and everything? Or should I go and do my own business? And I discovered in my fees that if I want to do something, my own business that gives me the returns, which are equivalent to what I'm getting through the job I had, I really need to build a big business. And so I said to myself, listen, I'm going to keep going to see how high is high in my career. And one piece as well, when I look at myself, is that, okay, to build your own business, you need to be a very, very strong entrepreneur. And for most of my career, I was protected by being part of a big corporation, right? And when you're part of a big corporation, you have the ability to stick to your principles more. Because if you have your own business and you're put under pressure, right, and you need to do something to get your business moving, like, I don't know, pay a facilitation for something or whatever it is, you might be tempted to do it because you don't have the power of a big company that can say no, right? And when I look back, I say, I'm happy with what I've done, but every once in a while I think, should I have jumped and done my own business at a certain point of time? And I look back and say, if I look back to my objective of financial freedom, if I achieved it, it doesn't matter how I achieved it. What matters is that I achieved it. And I think this is a big decision that people need to make, which is, do you want to go and do your own business? Why? Why do you want to do it? Is it because you don't want to have a boss? No, you will have a boss in whatever business you do. People who you serve are going to be your boss. Or you want to do it because of financial freedom. Financial freedom you can achieve in many, many ways. Depends also how you define financial freedom. Financial freedom is very different. So I remember I asked my boss once, and who was doing pretty well. I told him, "Are you rich?" He said, "Are you asking me if I'm rich or wealthy?" I don't understand the difference between rich and wealthy. He said, "Rich is that I have enough money to live well and buy whatever I want. Wealthy means I can buy a private jet." I told him, "Okay, which one are you?" He said, "No, I'm very rich, but I wouldn't." But that's a choice. That's another part of the choice. What are you going for? And being clear on these objectives and saying, oh, what do you want to, for example, assets. What assets do you want? You want to own a house? You don't want to own a house? You want to be a billionaire known by everyone? The level of risk you're going to take is much higher. The life balance is going to be more difficult. So I think these choices are very important and need to be made early on and tested every few years to see whether, okay, am I on the right track or not? I think this is a very enjoyable decade because your experience plays a very big role in who you are. You can do things much faster. The situations you get, you've seen a few times before. So you can argue that decisions are becoming easier. But the people piece is where the big difference comes. And this is the decade when I reached my peak in a multinational, then I moved on and worked in a different company. And the biggest difference, I think, came from the people part. When you're in a big position in a big multinational, everyone wants to talk to you. Everyone, right? Then you discover after you leave that everyone wanted to talk to the position. Only a few wanted to talk to the person. And I think this is a very important aspect of your life, which you realize. And I have a friend who's the same age. We studied together and we worked together for a long time. He told me, listen, this is the decade where you don't add friends. You reduce the number of friends because you start understanding people much more. And this is a big learning for me, is that I wish I understood people faster because I could have saved my time. I saved a lot of time by dealing with tough cases faster, by knowing who to trust faster. So I think the biggest learning of this decade is the people piece. You just learn how to deal with people in a different way. You learn who to trust and who not to trust. You learn who's genuine and who's not genuine. And it's a lot of fun with the experience. You know, you start leveraging your experience in a very positive way.
Talk to us about the current challenge. Obviously, you were brought back into an organizational environment from your consulting. So what's the excitement to do with where you are right now and what you're doing in this role?
So, the big learning I had from the consulting, I did a couple of years of consulting and it was a lot of fun, and I'm on a few boards now. But I found that the consulting is not my cup of tea because I like to see things to completion and to really see it happening. And I like to lead people to make companies better, achieve better shareholder return, but always build brands. And I think in this region, we can do better on brand building. You can probably count the number of global brands that came out of this region on a couple of hands. And I think there's much more potential than that. In some cases, there's not enough appreciation for the investment you can make and the return you can make by building a strong brand. And that's what make me go and work for regional companies to help, bring this, help also take the learnings from working in different parts of the world to make our region better, also make my home country better. I consider myself, I was able to get above average compared to my average in the country, men and women. So I need to give back to them. So that's a very important part of my life now, is that I really like to spend time making the people who are growing and becoming the leaders of tomorrow better. So I never shy away from giving trainings or giving talks or doing what we're doing now, because I think people need to listen to the different points of views and then form their own point of view. There is a bit in this region which is, it's too much black and white. Like leadership, there's so many different styles of leadership. There is no one right way, right? So people sometimes argue about, okay, but this is exactly how it should be done. No, there's nothing called exactly how it should be done. It just needs to be done, and look at the result at the end. If the result is there and is delivered in a legal and ethical way, great. It doesn't have to be done in exactly the same way. So I think the young generation now has a lot of positives where, the world is now better than it used to be a few years back. I know a lot of people talk about how difficult it is. Yes, it is difficult, but actually the world is better than 30 years ago. Whatever way you look at it, you look at any number. If you keep the emotions aside, we just hear about bad things faster because of the internet and social media and so on. But the world is much nicer than when we grew up. The tools available for people are much more. So if we wanted to understand something when we were young, we had to go really look for it. Now you find it in 20 seconds. So for sure, the world is better now. But I enjoy what I'm doing. I always test myself by saying, do I look forward to come to work in the morning? And the answer is yes. So as long as the answer is yes, I'll kind of keep on doing it.
Well, we've come to the end of our time, Mohamed, and I'm looking forward to keeping in touch to hear what goes on in your 60s, obviously in the next few years. And I really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing your story with us.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the discussion a lot, and I wish you the best. And, there was a question around if I'm willing to help. Yes, I'm willing to help. So people can reach me on LinkedIn, and many people do that. I love to see people succeeding. And absolutely, I wish we meet again in our 60s, both of us. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.